Very good. Thank you, Rio. So just so you know, networking is what makes people successful. It's really critical. For example, when you leave your job and you got look for a new job, you go to your network. If you're trying to make connections, you want to go to your network. So let's get started with the presentation. I'm going to introduce Ryan Crottle from VALENCELL. He's the VP of Marketing. VALENCELL is the world's leading company in developing technology around PPG sensors, the pulse plethysmograph, which is used in the pulse oximeter. So he's got some fascinating things to talk about, and I'll turn it over to Ryan. Very good, Ryan.
Thank you, Walt. I appreciate that kind introduction, and it's great to be here virtually with everyone. I look forward to soon being able to do this again in person, but this will have to do in the meantime. As Walt mentioned, VALENCELL makes the biometric sensor technology that goes into wearable devices of all kinds. And I'm not going to talk much about VALENCELL specifically. Happy to answer any questions about what we do, how we do it, that kind of stuff, if that's of interest. But what I wanted to talk more about today was something that we're seeing in the marketplace in specifically around hypertension management, but you can more broadly apply some of these themes and trends to chronic disease management more broadly. But we'll focus specifically on hypertension management as a case study, if you will, for some of these big macro level trends that are converging in the marketplace. And this notion that hypertension management will change more in the next 5 years than it has in the last 100, that's of course a pretty provocative statement, and hopefully I will have some rationale to share behind that as to why we believe that here at VALENCELL, and look forward to sharing that here in just a moment. But I will say just quick housekeeping or just how I like to do these presentations. Please do feel free to jump in if you've got questions or you want me to dive deeper on anything at any point throughout. I certainly don't want this to be a one-way monologue. So jump in and let me know if you've got questions or we want to discuss anything more specific in more detail. So with that, I will go ahead and jump into the presentation. So I'm assuming everyone can see the slides okay? Walt, Rio, all good? Yeah?
I can see it.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry,
great.
yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. All right. Yes. Okay. So here we go. At a macro level, anyone who's even tangentially watching this space is, I'm sure, noticed this rapid convergence going on between consumer wearable devices and health and medical devices. And you look at any of the recent device launches and product strategies from any of the big consumer device companies, they're moving towards becoming personal health devices, if not outright medical devices in some cases. And that's certainly gotten the attention of the traditional med device companies and pharma companies and corporate wellness organizations and others within that, underneath that umbrella of health and medical devices. And they're now beginning to make devices that are intended to be worn and used outside of medical facility, but still feed data back into patient workflow or treatment protocol of some kind. And so at a macro level, that's kind of what we're seeing in the marketplace is this convergence towards these devices that in some sense are providing an early warning system for individuals as they go about their daily activities, in establishing a personal baseline and then providing some level of indication or warning or recommendations if there's a deviation from that personal baseline across a variety of different metrics and indications depending on the specific device and use case. But if we just take a step back a bit and look at sort of the history of wearable devices more broadly, there's some interesting patterns here in that in this, what I call the first generation of wearable devices that were focused primarily around accelerometer-based metrics, simple activity tracking, not a whole lot of ongoing value beyond getting some sense of how much you moved and maybe some level of energy expenditure through the device itself. And frankly, there was a fairly high abandonment rate for those types of devices, primarily in the wellness and fitness realm. And then as biometric sensors and PPG sensors specifically came to dominate the sensor technology in wearable devices, these devices started to enable deeper insights into how an individual was responding to whatever they're doing at the time or longitudinally, and allowing consumers and in some cases patients to take more control over their health, and the insights that these devices can generate start to shape behavior in certain ways and provide insights into how changes in lifestyle or activity patterns are reflected in their physiological response, and then also looking at their biometric patterns as well. And now we're in this the very early stages of what I like to refer to as a third generation of wearable devices that are really focused around this notion of becoming personal health devices and more so outright medical devices. And then you start to combine those devices with services like digital therapeutics and digital health services more broadly. And you start to see this notion of care delivery moving outside of the four walls of a healthcare facility or a hospital, and moving towards getting integrated into people's daily lives, but also integrated into the health systems and health records as well. And where we're seeing the most traction early on, at least, is some of the indications that you see here in terms of cardiovascular monitoring, respiratory conditions, stroke, pain management, diabetes. There's a variety of different subsectors within the medical space that you're seeing a combination of wearable devices and digital health and therapeutic services starting to make an impact. And of course, the value creation associated with that is exponentially larger than the initial sports and fitness use cases, or even the personal health and general wellness use cases. Not to diminish those by any means, but the application and the impact on patient outcomes and ultimately helping people live longer, healthier lives is becoming a reality now with these devices and services. But so why the focus on hypertension? Because you could argue many of these chronic diseases are ripe for change, and many of them are frankly ahead of hypertension management in terms of the progression of these digital health solutions. You look at cardiovascular monitoring with the ECG patches that are becoming more ubiquitous, and of course the consumer wearable devices that have even basic heart rate monitoring, but also things like AFib detection in wearable devices that number now hundreds of millions of devices in the field around the world. Respiratory conditions, you've got companies like ResMed and Propeller Health and others who are using combinations of devices and software and digital health services as a way to impact respiratory conditions. And of course, the massive efforts over the past couple of decades in smoking cessation has also had a significant impact there. And of course, diabetes management with continuous glucose monitors, and now you've got companies like Virta Health who are combining those glucose monitors with digital health applications and solutions, starting to demonstrate through clinical studies the impact that those services can have on diabetes management. So hypertension we see as the next major chronic disease that is going to have some dramatic change coming to it in the very near future over the next few years. And there's several reasons for that that I'll talk about in a little more detail. But first and foremost, it's a massive global public health problem. There's, depending on whose numbers you look at, these are World Health Organization numbers, over 1 billion people have high blood pressure worldwide. It is either directly or indirectly attributed to 10 million deaths per year. And the really scary thing is it's known as the silent killer because there are no outward symptoms of hypertension. And you combine that with the fact that the large number of comorbidities associated with hypertension. If you don't know you have high blood pressure, then that damage accumulates over time and contributes to, and it is a comorbidity associated with a variety of different cardiovascular conditions, stroke, kidney disease, diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, and dementia. It is, in fact, the World Health Organization lists it as the #1 risk factor for all of global health burden. So that's higher than cigarette smoking, higher than obesity, higher than blood glucose and diabetes. It's the #1 risk factor. And something that doesn't get as much attention, but the research is really starting to pile up at this point around what is known as cumulative blood pressure and the cumulative effect of high blood pressure, more specifically, that it is more indicative to look at the area under the curve, if you will, and how long you have spent with elevated blood pressures as opposed to looking at any individual readings. All of these things, in combination with the fact that there are no outward symptoms, are contributing factors to making monitoring of blood pressure that much easier and more convenient and more weaved into people's daily lives in a way that allows them to understand their current blood pressure status and the trends that they're seeing in that blood pressure going up and down over time. So all of those considerations are significant, certainly, but there's also from a technical and a market perspective, there's a few other considerations that are I think important to think about in terms of how hypertension management is really on the cusp of some dramatic changes. And first and foremost being the sensor technology itself. There's been, frankly, no meaningful innovation in blood pressure sensors in more than 100 years. The picture on the left is one of the first blood pressure cuffs that came to market in 1911. It looks eerily similar to how we take blood pressure today, at least how many people and clinicians take blood pressure today. That is starting to change, of course, with the introduction of cuffless blood pressure sensors that are now being approved by regulatory bodies. And you're seeing rapid advancements in that sensor technology in a way that we think is going to be really impactful in making blood pressure monitoring much more passive, much more continuous, and certainly much easier for people to do on a regular basis without having to put on a blood pressure cuff, inflate that cuff, make sure it's fitted appropriately, and interpreting the results appropriately. Secondly, of course, then is the care delivery, and I'll talk about each one of these in a little more details, but I'll touch the highlights here. There's certainly a trend towards care delivery moving outside of the four walls of a hospital or healthcare facility and into people's homes and everyday lives. You see that in the growth in remote patient monitoring and digital therapeutics and digital health more broadly, as we've touched on earlier. And then, of course, you always want to follow the money, right? And payer models are moving towards value-based care and away from fee-for-service, with the value-based care, of course, being much more focused on prevention and regular monitoring and establishing that personal health baseline and accessing the healthcare system when there's a deviation from that baseline. So there's a lot more going on in each one of these, and a lot of things that have to happen to bring these fully into the market and into fruition. But you're certainly seeing the trends there, and the pandemic environment that we're still dealing with to a certain extent have certainly accelerated many of these trends that were already in place pre-pandemic. From a sensor technology standpoint, though, we've seen this play out before with heart rate monitoring. So coming back to this 3 generations of wearable devices, if you went back to the first generation of wearable devices, really the only way to measure heart rate was, at least with a wearable device or without using a 12-lead ECG hooked up and primarily in a medical facility, was using a chest strap that many amateur athletes and professional athletes used. Those, again, depending on whose numbers you look at, those topped out in terms of market volume at around 15 to 20 million units per year. And now with the massive growth in wearable devices and those wearable devices measuring at a minimum heart rate, and if not a variety of other biometrics, you're looking at somewhere between 400 and 500 million devices in the field today, with several hundred more million units being added every year, if you believe the market estimates for the next couple of years in terms of market growth. What's interesting is if you look at the blood pressure cuff market, those are selling about 15 to 20 million units a year in the cuff monitors today. And you can very clearly see a path to, as this sensor technology evolves into becoming regulatory cleared and wearable, that this gets integrated into hundreds of millions of devices in the field in the course of the next, say, 5 to 10 years. And it will become a standard feature for these devices to go alongside of heart rate and heart rate variability, and you're seeing respiration rate more often these days. And
Ryan, if I could interrupt with a question.
Oh, yes, please.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Are these numbers US market or world market?
So these are global.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So from a care delivery standpoint, I'm sure you guys have seen some of these numbers or reference to this McKinsey study or McKinsey estimate or forecast, I guess is a better term that about $250 billion in healthcare spend could be virtualized. And that's when they say could be, meaning with existing technology and existing services. So that's a big number and a big estimate, and it gets a lot of attention. But when you look at how that breaks down, it's a reasonable number in terms of the estimates they've made. Seem to be relatively conservative, actually, in how much of that could be virtualized or done outside of a healthcare facility. You combine that with things like this Rock Health report from just a few weeks ago, I think it was, got a lot of attention as well, that the digital health funding in the first half of this year surpassed all of last year's digital health funding, which was already a massive record year in 2020. And you can see the dollar value and the number of deals there. So there's a tremendous amount of investment going into digital health more broadly, and things like remote patient monitoring and virtual care across the spectrum. But there's large amounts of investment going in. But I think more importantly, you're now starting to see real clinical results from these digital health services and digital therapeutics and wearable devices. So I just pulled a couple of headlines and studies that highlight some of the clinical studies that have been published recently across chronic disease more broadly. And some of these are related to diabetes and hypertension. Others are related to blood pressure control, more specifically, and getting people down into the healthy range of blood pressure. And this is mainly through digital therapeutics, the results of these studies. But I think it's important. It's an important milestone or forcing function within the marketplace to make sure that this care delivery in a virtualized model or a digital therapeutics model it has proven efficacy through clinical studies that demonstrate that this can be used more broadly on a population level and still show the kind of results that some of these have shown in smaller studies or pilot studies. And the last point here is the payer models, and we could talk a lot about this, and there's certainly a long way to go in getting to true value-based care. But one of the things I thought was interesting is even before, this was pre-COVID, in January of 2020, 2 new CPT codes were released for reimbursement, specifically around quote unquote self-measured blood pressure, i.e. Home-based or outside of medical facility blood pressure, and the monitoring of that blood pressure by clinicians. And so this enables them to get reimbursed for blood pressure monitoring outside of the clinical setting and in people's daily lives. And what's interesting one is it's certainly helpful from a market standpoint to be able to, and from a market standpoint in terms of clinician adoption, to be able to get reimbursed for out-of-office blood pressure measurements. But it's also a recognition, as you see here, that more frequent measurements outside of medical facilities are more insightful and more predictive of cardiovascular risk and other chronic disease risk than getting measured a few times a year whenever you happen to go to a doctor or a healthcare facility to get your blood pressure monitored. And it helps address things like white coat, or what's known as white coat syndrome, when people who have elevated blood pressure when they go into the doctor's office for a checkup or to get their blood pressure measured, that there's a well-known phenomenon that they call white coat syndrome, where that blood pressure gets elevated, even though someone may not have elevated blood pressure normally as they go about their day-to-day activities. And then there's also, and this is even a worse scenario, is what's known as masked hypertension, where it's the opposite of that, where someone who has hypertension in their day-to-day lives goes into a hospital or healthcare facility, gets their blood pressure measured, and it registers as normal. And that's also a well-known condition that has even worse implications in some ways, in that if you're not taking action to address that high blood pressure, then there's certainly elevated risk there for a variety of different conditions that I talked about before. And besides the patient outcomes, which is obviously the main focus here, there's a massive dollar cost involved. This is just US, this is CDC data that they estimated close to $80 billion annually is spent on high blood pressure measurement, a combination of medications and then also dealing with some of the comorbidities I mentioned earlier that that hypertension can help, or not help, excuse me, that contribute to accelerating the conditions around. So certainly lots of opportunity there, and lots of both patient outcome and financial incentive to try to put a dent in these hypertension numbers that it really, the scale and the scope of the problem is really daunting in many ways, but we at VALENCELL are really on a mission to help improve the quality of life for anyone who's dealing with hypertension or high blood pressure or any of the associated conditions through the validated technology and digital therapeutics that ultimately help people live longer, healthier lives. And that's really our focus, and that's why we believe that and are working diligently towards making this belief come true that hypertension management will change more in the next 5 years than it has in the last 100. So welcome any thoughts, discussion, questions, anything we want to jump into. Happy to dive into anything deeper.
Well, there's one question from Sean Murphy about, did you discuss any new sensing modalities at the beginning? And I want to apologize for those who were unable to join early because of the problem with the passcode. I'm glad you were patient and finally did join. This is being recorded, so you'll be able to get the full recording.
So we didn't talk in detail about the different new sensor modalities that are coming to market, other than just to say there's a variety of different cuffless blood pressure monitoring technologies that are coming to market and getting regulatory clearance for those technologies. We obviously at VALENCELL are focused on a PPG-based solution that can integrate into wearable devices of all kinds. But there are also companies working on video technology and being able to use, for example, a camera on a mobile phone to be able to measure blood pressure and or at least estimate blood pressure, I guess I should say. And then there's also a couple of different other sensor modalities in using pressure sensors in combination with PPG sensors. And that the initial use case for that appears to be on the back of a mobile phone, as an example, where you could flip over the phone and put your finger on the sensor and get a reading of blood pressure. And then the other sensor modality or methodology, I guess I should say, is a combination of PPG sensor and ECG sensor. And that's using a methodology called pulse transit time, or sometimes it's called pulse arrival time. They're very similar in the methodology, but it's essentially looking at the time it takes from the beat of the heart to the time the pulse wave reaches an extremity where the other sensor is located. And so the other sensor meaning the ECG and or PPG sensor. So those are a few of those. I didn't have any prepared slides around that, but if you're interested in more detail on that, we've got some materials on that I can share.
So Ryan, you shared something with me. Is that what you would be able to share with the people? It's a discussion of a trial that you did.
That was purely focused on our PPG only technology.
Yes.
And that's one of the key differences with our technology from any of the others that I mentioned before, is that our PPG based or PPG only technology is entirely calibration free. So most of those other modalities I just mentioned require regular calibration to a blood pressure cuff. So what I sent you, that is public information, by the way, so you're welcome to share that with anyone.
So if anybody wants that description of more details of what VALENCELL has, you can either contact Ryan or myself.
Yeah,
I believe it was Nicholas raised his hand. I'm sorry, Ryan. Go ahead.
I was just to finish out that thought, or to provide a little more information on what that study. That was a clinical study on the PPG only technology that I mentioned before. That was done according to the ISO standard for blood pressure cuff accuracy. That's the standard that the FDA focuses on. It's ISO 81060, I believe it is, and that study included, I think it was about 160 or so, maybe 170 patients, and several thousand data sets from each of those patients. The technology has been tested on, well, now more than 7,000 patients, but the study that Fred's referring to specifically was a separate study that we focused that data collection specifically according to the ISO standard.
So Nicholas, you raised your hand. If you want to ask a question, can you unmute yourself and go ahead? Or are you able to? Rio, if he's not able to, can you help out?
Yeah, let me try. All we can do is ask for them to unmute themselves, but they have full control of mute.
Okay.
So
Sometimes it's hard to find how to do it.
Yeah, there is a question from Jerome Calvo. Is the Apple Watch working on this?
This is all public information as well. From what we understand, they are working on this. They're doing some studies, I believe in collaboration with the University of Michigan, if I remember correctly. But that's, I haven't seen any additional public information about what exactly they are working on, other than they are working on blood pressure, cuffless blood pressure monitoring.
Thank you.
We had another person. Okay, we've got a question here from Camille. Can your technology be used not only in wearable, but also in other devices? And I don't know how to get that message to be big enough to show it.
Like for example, smart desks.
Yeah. So if the question was specifically around VALENCELL technology, I can speak to that. So yes, it can work in a variety of different form factors and devices. We do need the sensor to be coupled to the skin. So whether that's in a watch or in an earbud or a hearing aid or a wristband or armband, whatever it might be. We're also working on patch implementation. That is an area we need the ability, I think we need the ability to see blood flow. But other than that, there's a wide variety of form factors and devices it can go into.
We've got a
Yes,
question here. Rio,
do you
can
hear
you
me?
take questions? I'm having trouble.
Do you hear me? I'm Nicholas.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, sorry. I'm Nicolas from France, and I have a question about, there's the first company to launch and get the CE for cuffless wrist blood pressure device seems to be the Swiss from Switzerland, Actia. So my question is the only difference between Actia device and VALENCELL technology the calibration? Because I know that Actia needs a calibration. So is this the only difference between Actia and VALENCELL technology? Thank you.
Sure, and good question. I'm familiar with Actia. We have not tested their device, so I can't speak to their user experience and the technology in great detail. But yes, my understanding is that they do require calibration. So that the main difference is exactly what you pointed out, the need for calibration with a device like Actia's. Our technology does not require calibration at all. I should say we do need 4 pieces of information about the individual. That we need their age, height, weight, and gender. If we have those 4 pieces of information, plus of course the sensor data, we can give an accurate reading of blood pressure.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
There's a question from Paul.
Hi, Michael. I'm sorry we missed the earlier part of the conversation. I'm just trying to wrap my head around your positioning in the market. Is your company, VALENCELL, just a sensor company where you focus on the sensors that other companies then OEM and drop those sensors into their monitors? Or are these monitors, I just went to your website, there are several different monitors. Do you actually produce those monitors using your own sensors?
Yeah, we don't make the devices themselves. We focus exclusively on the PPG sensor technology, and we provide that technology to device makers of all kinds.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And there's another question. Are there any viable non-contact blood pressure monitoring approaches on the horizon?
Yeah, so I would say the most promising one that we have seen is video-based. There are a lot of challenges with it that still, and technical challenges that need to be overcome, primarily associated with the light environment and the consistency in that those light patterns, because what it's doing is using the camera to identify changes in blood flow in the face and light absorption in the face. And so the environment, specifically the light environment you use that technology can vary quite a bit, and therefore the results can vary quite a bit. Most of at least the publicly available data is lab testing, where those conditions are fairly tightly controlled. And so with all that said, with all those caveats said, there seems to be quite a bit of potential for that technology in terms of the non-contactless capabilities.
Okay, we've got 1 or 2 people that have raised their hands. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question or type it into the chat.
Hi, if I could jump in.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Ryan. So one of my questions was about Actia, and it sounds like you're not connected with them. So it's maybe
Correct.
overlap in technology, but certainly not working together. I'd like to hear more about your sensor technology. So I'm familiar with PPG. Any information you can share about, for example, body location, constraints. The real pressure in the arteries changes with the position of the body. and the location of the sensor. And so how you deal with those, any information you could share about what wavelengths and sample rates. And, I presume you're looking at some characteristics in the PPG waveform and inferring from that, I assume mean arterial blood pressure rather than systolic and diastolic, but I'm not sure. So any information you can sort of go into a little bit more detail about your sensor and the technology behind it and how you use that to derive blood pressure would be greatly appreciated.
Sure. And sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Jeff Marshall.
Oh, hey, Jeff. Okay. I couldn't tell who was talking. So yeah, there's a lot there. A quick bit about the sensor technology itself. So VALENCELL has been making PPG sensors for more than a decade now. So for the longer than the word wearables has been around, let alone the whole market. Much of our innovation and value we have brought to the market is really around making PPG sensors motion tolerant, even during high intensity activities. As you probably know, PPG as a methodology has been around for decades, if not longer, in the form of pulse ox clips and the vital sign clips on the earlobes. The methodology is extremely sensitive to motion. So by default, when you shine light into the human body, that light scatters as soon as it hits human tissue. And so finding the signal amongst all of the noise is extremely challenging, especially when you put that sensor in a wearable device that is by default moving at least a little bit, if not a lot. So we have addressed many of those challenges through a variety of different hardware and software innovations over the years. We've put that technology in 60 plus devices that have now come to market, most of which have been in the consumer wearables space, just given that's where the wearables market has grown up. And as an ingredient technology company, that's where our market opportunity was. In the last, say, 4 or 5 years, we've, as this convergence has gone on between consumer wearables and health and medical devices, we've gotten much more involved in involved in projects with med device companies, pharma and clinical research, insurance companies, a pretty broad spectrum of different companies underneath the health and medical umbrella. I say all that as background just to say that's also driven a lot of our R&D and technology development towards getting more out of the PPG signal than has ever been possible before. And the latest example of that is this blood pressure technology. So it is, to dive into that in a little more detail, it is PPG only, as I mentioned. So we are looking at features within the PPG waveform that correlate with blood pressure readings. And we use, of course, machine learning models on large data sets to be able to identify those feature sets and build a generalized model that works on a broad spectrum of the population and a broad spectrum of blood pressures. And that labeled data set of PPG waveform data aligned with blood pressure cuff data simply didn't exist in the world. So we had to go create it. And we've spent the last few years doing massive amounts of data collection in different locations around the world to build up a data set, a labeled data set that we can build our models off of and get those models to enough accuracy to meet the ISO standard to get regulatory clearance through, or for, excuse me. And so that is where we stand today. We will take this technology through the FDA 510K process later this year. And we, as I mentioned before, our business model is not selling the devices themselves, but we felt and saw a need for this technology to get regulatory clearance to primarily serve as a predicate for future devices that our customers, other device makers, would then take through the FDA process or regulatory clearance process more broadly, and help accelerate that process for them by serving as a predicate. So that's a lot. I know I'll pause there. And there's there's not a whole lot more detail I am at liberty to go into in terms of how the technology works. But hopefully that was enough to give you a little more context.
And if I was interested in pursuing more, are you the contact
Oh,
person?
yeah. Feel free to reach out to me. And I'm sorry, I meant to add my contact information to this slide, but Walt and Rio certainly know how to get a hold of me. My email is just my last name @VALENCELL. So it's KRAUDEL @VALENCELL. That's the best way to get a hold of me. And yeah, happy to have a deeper dive on the technology if that's of interest.
Okay, thank you. One more question. I know there was litigation between VALENCELL and Apple that was settled, but so this is not, the blood pressure part is not ongoing with Apple. I sort of read between the lines on that. Is that the case?
No comment.
Okay, thank you. I'll get in touch.
Okay.
I got a question. I'm Nicholas again.
Yes.
I'm trying to imagining a little bit the close future. The Actia device only does blood pressure. Okay, the price is around $200. The Apple Watch is around $300, and what I will need to just imagine is the Apple Watch, including your technology, will add how many dollars will be added? Like it will be a 350 or 400 or 500?
That is not a question I can answer. That's up to the device makers themselves as to how much they would add to the retail price of the devices.
I may be able to help a little with that. Adding a PPG sensor to a wearable device is less than $10, or maybe on the order of $10. It depends a lot on the volume. Now, there's a multiplier, so maybe it would add $50, but not hundreds of dollars.
Okay, so if Apple Watch launch tomorrow, Apple or Samsung or other brands launch the watch with the blood pressure, I think that it will be a big pricing problem for Actia, because it only does the blood pressure instead of a watch which is doing many things.
Yeah, so if Apple is able to achieve this, and we don't know what technology they might use, there are several that are being worked on, it's likely to be a very low cost solution.
Thank you.
I have a question.
We have a, excuse me, oh, that sounds like Jeff.
It does.
Jeff has a question. Do you have data that you can share regarding the differences in PPG readings on skin tone? Is that the question you were going to ask?
Yeah, based on skin tone. We hear in the press that that's one of the challenges in PPG readings, and I'd just like to learn whatever wisdom you have to offer.
Yeah, I will send you, we get this question so much, we finally wrote a blog post about it, so I can send you the link to that post. The reality is that so skin tone can be an issue if the sensor technology company or the device company does not implement the well-known mitigations for skin tone issues. And there's a variety of ways to get around that issue. And we've had this solved for many, many years and have implemented this in our sensor technology for years. Not all sensor companies choose to implement those solutions for whatever reason, whether that's cost or they don't know how to implement the solutions, but we actually see there's bigger issues related to blood perfusion, as an example, depending on where the device is located and what the person is doing with the device. We have in our headquarters, we have what we call a biometrics testing lab, and we have hundreds of volunteers who come through there. Well, in non-pandemic times, hundreds of volunteers who come through that lab, testing out a variety of different technologies, our latest R&D. And that volunteer pool includes people of all different skin tones, fitness levels, body shapes, sizes, you name it. And so we've got extensive experience in this, and we have people in that volunteer pool who have extremely high melanin counts, high on the Fitzpatrick scale, who have, you see some of the best PPG waveforms of anyone on those individuals. It has much more to do with the perfusion of the individual and the activity they happen to be doing with those devices. Hopefully
Thank you. Thank you. I'll reach out to you through email.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
Sort of a related question. This is Jeff Marshall. It seems like the work that I've seen you, VALENCELL, do is primarily heart rate and now blood pressure, but I don't know how much SpO2 you have done. Is that an area where you have technology as well?
So we've got a variety of different outputs from our sensor technology. So things like respiration rate, and SpO2 is one that we're seeing a lot more interest in recently, not surprisingly. The way we have chosen to implement that specific output of SpO2 is our sensors provide the outputs from the red and infrared channel and leave it up to the device maker to actually calculate the SpO2. And that's primarily because similar to, we do a similar thing with heart rate variability, and we output the RR interval and let the device maker calculate the heart rate variability using whichever methodology of calculating HRV that they choose. And both of those are by design because different device makers want to implement those in either slightly or drastically different ways. And so we've chosen not to provide those as direct outputs, but we provide the inputs and application notes on how to implement those.
Does your technology go into cleaning the retina IR signal, which is a key part of the problem before you
Yes.
do SpO2
Yes,
calculation? So it's not that you're stay away from SpO2 completely. It's just that final calculation part.
That's right. That's exactly.
And I presume partly legal reasons as well with people.
Yeah, there's
Massimo in the field.
There is an element of that too.
Okay, and then a question for Walt. So did I understand that this video would be available and the slides as well?
Yes, the video will be available, and Ryan,
sure,
can you make the slides
happy to
available?
make the slides available too.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you.
I think we've gotten our questions pretty well taken care of, and we've reached an hour. And we've held the audience in people haven't left, so apparently they've really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you very much, Ryan.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate it, and great questions, good discussion.
And what I'd like to do now is have some networking. As I mentioned at the beginning, networking is a very valuable thing. Your network is often the most valuable thing you've got. So this will be an opportunity for people to introduce themselves if they choose to. So if you would simply unmute yourself. Let's see. If I can, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to help in organizing this. It's hard to see everybody, but I could start here. I see some.
So I'm interested in chatting with you, Jeff Marshall. This is Jeff Stevens, chatting further.
Okay. The company I work for is Rhythm Diagnostic Systems. If you could go to the, I'll give you an email, or I don't know, Walt, what is the best way to
you can put your email in chat.
Oh, okay.
Or
yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
If you contact me, I'd be happy to connect you.
Yeah, I can.
Great, thanks.
I can put it in chat. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk.
Why don't both of you introduce yourselves to everybody else?
Jeff, you first.
Okay, same first name. I'm sure that'll be confusing, but name's Jeff Marshall. Work for a company, Rhythm Diagnostic Systems. Bay Area company, been around for 10 years as a really small operation, doing some research in a number of areas. And as of last year, basically moved center of operations to Strasbourg in France. So we're a French company now, with an initial target in European markets, but certainly interested in the US markets eventually as well. Major challenges in terms of making a clinical product, but have been working on a vital signs monitoring patch type sensor for a number of years.
Thank you.
So I'm Jeff Stevens, and I'm a serial entrepreneur and inventor. And I work on continuous vital sign monitoring to identify patients at risk of deterioration in hospitals, and as well after they leave the hospital using remote patient monitoring.
Thank you.
Where are you located, Jeff?
Here in the Silicon Valley.
Okay, me as well.
Fred Little, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is Fred Little. I'm with Providence Enterprise. We're manufacturers of medical devices and very interested in the whole healthcare swing and growth. And I really enjoyed my relationship with Walt and now with VALENCELL. I think it's a huge opportunity for all of us that are looking at this marketplace and looking forward to introducing some products that'll grow very rapidly.
Yeah, I agree. Blood pressure measurement is changing rapidly, and change is an opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what we find as we talk to the market, that the existing cuff methodology is perceived as past time, and we see the market looking for newer solutions. So I think VALENCELL's efforts and investments they've made over the years are going to pay off very handsomely for them, and I hope for us too.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Nagel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yes, I'm Troy Nagel. I'm a professor at NC State in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering, and I teach courses on medical electronics, medical design, and I'm always looking for student projects where students can put devices together, make measurements. We do a fall course where it's called Product Innovation Lab, where the business students with engineering students and industrial design students get together and try to come up with a marketable product idea. And then in the spring, I actually have medical BME students and electrical engineering students working together on sensors and making medical monitoring devices.
Very good. I believe that VALENCELL has a prototype, something that you can purchase, not as a product, but exactly what your students might be interested in. So you might want to contact Ryan.
Yes, I had looked at that some years ago, and I've taken students out to VALENCELL for tours in past years before we had COVID.
Okay, thank you. Kemi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me? My name is Kemi Koda. I'm a founder of US Asia Venture Partners. And also I'm an angel investor at Stanford Angels and Band of Angels. Looking for interesting new technology to invest. I invest as pre-seed and seed right now.
Very
Nice
good.
to meet you.
So if people would like to contact you, you could put your email on the chat, or people can send chat, or if you want to contact me, I can connect.
Yeah, I will post my email address. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Chuck Hazard, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a longtime friend of Ryan's. I work at Heads Up Health, which is a health analytics platform. We're based out of Scottsdale, Arizona, in Vermont. And so we connect devices, blood labs, medical records, so for both consumers and healthcare providers.
Very good. Really cool. Jerome Calvo, would you like to introduce yourself? If you don't want to, that's fine. Or if you're having trouble, just you just need to find where the unmute button is. We'll move ahead. Let's see. Have you raised your hand? I'm not sure if I think you've raised your hand, but I don't know what to do if I can't hear you. So let's move on to Nicholas. Let's see. You did a brief introduction, but go ahead.
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my name is Nicolas Brulet. I'm from France. And if you go back to the first slide of your presentation, there were two doctors taking a mechanical way to take the blood pressure. It was a black and white picture, and this black and white, yes, in the yes, you see these two doctors taking the blood pressure. So these two guys are Mr. Spengler and Mr. Charles Lobry, which were French, and I'm representing the company Spengler, who was part of the emulsion in the end of the 19th century to create and launch the first and invent the first sphygmomanometers. I know there were people also in Italia doing this, Rivarocci. So I'm part of the company Spengler, historically inventor of the mechanical way to take blood pressure with sphygmomanometers. And our R&D manager is already in contact with Mike Felice. And our target is to invent and make conception and design new products. And we are really interested in PPG and VALENCELL.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Walt. Sorry, I joined a bit late, so I need to watch a video later. But very interesting project. I used to work in the wireless communication engineering and standards space for more than 10 years. And in recent years, I've been more focused in mobile health projects in health tech. So as I started to work in this space, I noticed and I learned that it's not just about the engineering or the technology itself, and it's also about the human, right? Like the human behavior. And for example, if blood pressure, of course, blood pressure is very important, hypertension is very important. But if people don't measure, don't care about, if they want to care about the management of the blood pressure, there are many ways to do it. And I believe some people are doing it when they realize that is a big problem. So I think that is the problem. I think for now we can solve it before the next blood pressure sensor is available. And of course, it would be very useful if this technology becomes available. So we are working on that platform, which is more focused on software and the usability and making it accessible to more people, especially even people who doesn't have access to very expensive technology and just the lowest cost, the cheap Android phones. They should be able to do something to manage their health and improve their health. So that is my area of focus currently. And as to the blood pressure sensor, I have a question about in case it hasn't been discussed, right, is the accuracy, what's the accuracy, and also the accuracy in terms of physically achievable, right? Based on whatever, what could be the limitation in the PPG or in the sensor technology itself, in terms of measuring or calculating the blood pressure through that measurement. Assuming, I mean, the least noise environment available. I wonder if that has been discussed. I'm just curious about it. Thank you.
Ryan, do you want to take that?
Sure. Hi, Anna. We didn't dive into much detail on the accuracy of the technology, but I can actually the clinical study that Walt mentioned earlier gets into that in a lot of detail. But just a quick summary. Our PPG sensor technology that is calibration free is now showing accuracy that meets the ISO standard, the ISO 81060-2, which is a mean error of plus or minus 5 millimeters of mercury and a standard deviation of plus or minus 8 millimeters of mercury. And that's the primary standard that the FDA uses for clearance of blood pressure monitors, including cuffs. And so that technology is working at that level at the fingertip. So for implementations like a pulse ox clip or even say the back of a mobile device or something along those lines, as well as at the ear in earbuds or in hearing aids. And we are working on measuring blood pressure at the wrist and have seen dramatic improvements there, but it's not, the wrist is more challenging in terms of the motion artifacts and just the physiology of the wrist. So hopefully that helps give you a sense of the level of accuracy in the different body locations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would be great if there are references to some of this information, if you can share.
Sure.
Thank you.
There's on the link on the, there's been some stuff on the chat. And if you'll send me an email, Anna, or if you send one to Ryan, there's a description of the study that you can get.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Walt.
Nicholas, you have your hand raised. Did you have another comment?
No, sorry, it's a mistake.
Okay, no problem. All right, I believe we've gotten everybody. Jerome, if you wanted to unmute and talk, that you're welcome to. If not, that's fine. So what I would like to do, if you heard somebody that sounded interesting you'd like to meet, you can try and contact them directly through Meetup, but you could also email me and I will make sure that you get in contact. I really want to help people make connections. That's very valuable. So thank you everybody for attending. I'm going to leave. Rio, can you leave this open for a few more minutes so that if people wanted to use chat to connect, they'll be able to?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
Get off, I have to go. Thank you very much, Ryan, for your presentation. And this was a wonderful audience from all over the world with all kinds of different involvements in blood pressure monitoring. This was really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me. And it was great to talk to everybody. Thanks for your time.
We appreciate you, Ryan, and we've got a few people here. Is there anyone remaining that would like to say any last questions or comments while we have Ryan Crottle on the line? Looks
Just
like
say thank you.
Okay, that's lovely. We appreciate all, and we'll be in touch through email. And anyone who wishes to share further about who they are and their projects or questions amongst those in the networking attendees, please reach out to us and we'll make sure that networking continues. Be well all. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.